Welcome back. Okay, let's crack on with John 11, looking at Lazarus. Okay, we're now at the point where Jesus has actually, uh, come to the tomb, having delayed, and he's already found out that Lazarus is, of course, buried, but he knew that all along. He seemed to know that in advance, and we see here that first of all, straight away, there's lots of people who have come to console them. That may have been another reason for the delay, because of course that gives time for witnesses to gather, or the visitors for the funeral to see them buried and comfort the family. And so Jesus has arrived in the perfect time, right in the middle of a crowd. And Mary and Martha are interested in the way that they respond. Of course, we know them from the other gospel. We might want to bear in mind that John is expecting his readers to know that, what they were like or know about them, but we don't know that for sure, even though we saw that indicated at the beginning of the chapter where he said it was Mary who anointed Jesus, even though that story is not until chapter 12. Okay, so it's interesting how they react. Martha immediately jumps up and runs out, but Mary remains seated in the house. Okay, now this might be just dramatic, and I might be reading into this a little bit too much, but it's interesting that Martha is the one for a bit of action. So she goes, she finds Jesus, right? Mary, on the other hand, just sits and waits. That does rather echo what you see in Luke 10, doesn't it, where Mary sits at the feet of Jesus while Martha's busy, So she's the man of action, as it were. But what's also interesting is that as we see this story go on, it's Mary who has the deeper experience with Jesus. It's Mary who comes to a deeper understanding of what Jesus is offering. And actually, that might be a dramatic device that John picks up on, because it's very similar when you've got the tomb at the resurrection of Jesus. Then the two disciples race each other to the tomb, and one of them stops and looks in, but the other one goes in and believes. Okay, so the one who comes last, the one who holds back, as it were, comes to a deeper realization of who Jesus is. And for me, I think it sort of bounces off the idea of the parable of the sower. There's that one that receives the news with great joy and springs up, but then withers. But the one who digs down and puts down roots is the one that produces a harvest. So I think there's a sort of a hint there. It's like, challenging us as readers, challenging us as believers to think deeply about things, because we'll look for a deeper experience with God rather than just madly rushing and accepting things at surface value. And also in terms of evangelism, I might extend that for my own point, is that don't look for quick conversions. I don't like it when I go out and preach the gospel and somebody goes, yeah, I believe, and they say a prayer with me, and they say a prayer because they're mad for Jesus for a short while. They're like a straw fire, it flares up. Oh, aren't they brilliant? And you see them giving their testimony a couple of weeks later. I'll never backslide. I love the Lord and all the rest of it. And then 6 months later, they're in the pub again. Whereas I like somebody who sits back and is wary and wants to weigh it up and ask questions and prods and pokes and works it all out, and then eventually when they make a commitment, it really is a lifelong commitment, and they may never flare up like a grass fire, but they will burn for a whole lifetime. I'd rather have something like a coal fire with a nice deep glow to it than a grass fire that comes and goes in a moment. Anyway, I'm getting lyrical, getting off the point as well. Okay then, so it's very interesting how they react in different ways. I think it's interesting also what Martha says here. If you had been here, my brother would not have died. Now surely they know that there have been people who have been healed from a distance, like the official's son. Surely they know that you don't need Jesus physically there. But we are religious. I've often heard it said, if only we could have Jesus come and visit to preach. Well, do you not realise we have that through the Holy Spirit? And in fact, through the Holy Spirit, he can be everywhere at once. He's also with you now. Okay, and so it shouldn't make a difference. But we are tactile people. We have greater faith if we could physically see Jesus. It's not logical, but it is understandable. But of course, she's actually technically wrong. Okay, it didn't make any difference if Jesus was there or not. He could have just said a word, in fact. This is the thing that confounds us. He waits for 2 days before he goes back. By the time he gets back, Lazarus has already been there for 4 days, in the tomb. Actually, he could have just given the command. And we saw elsewhere where he doesn't even appear to give a command. It's just somebody is healed because he wills it. It's quite remarkable. But he doesn't do that here. And for all of that, she says, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. That's really not true. Okay? And it's a real challenge to us, because do we believe that healings can only happen if Jesus is here physically? In that case, we're never going to see anything happen. We should believe, because God is sovereign and God can do these things, and he's given us these things through his Holy Spirit. And it's interesting as she goes on. She says, whatever you ask from God, God will give you. She shows faith. And when he says that he'll rise again, she sort of cites from the scriptures, I know he'll rise again in the resurrection on the last day. Right? These are well-worn scriptures. These are well-worn sayings. These are well-established doctrinal statements of faith. All right? She's clinging to those things. I know, right? But she doesn't quite seem to believe that anything will happen in the here and now. She's kind of hinted at that when she said, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. But she can't quite believe that he would come back from the dead, because once he's dead, well, that's it. The door's closed. Surely, it's too late now. And there's a real challenge to us here. She's clutching at straws. She's making a statement of faith, and we sometimes do the same thing. But Jesus is calling her to think of something a lot more substantial, a lot more immediate, that God can heal in the here and now. Of course, in verse 25, you've got this an ego eimi saying, an I am saying, I am the resurrection and the life. Okay, he who believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Okay, it's quite cryptic. It's almost poetic. Well, it is poetic. And there's this challenge. Do you believe this? You've got to unravel it first, because it's all this poetic turn of phrases. It's like one of these Hebrew marshal, one of these proverbs, there's a real push there to really think, is he playing on words here? Is he making it like a riddle, so you've got to sit down and think about it? Why does he want us to think about it? Well, he actually wants us to think about it because he wants us to grasp what he really means. If he just said it plainly, we'd just go yes or no. But because he says it in this cryptic way, it makes us, chow through it. Okay. So I love the fact that it's Mary who says here, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is coming into the world. What does that remind you of? I don't know about you, but it reminds me of the words of Peter on the mat, the sort of confession, you are the Christ. And it's very interesting. I think it's a bit of a challenge in some ways, because here, and this is going to sound misogynistic for a moment, it's a woman who's saying it. Now, the reason that's very striking is that, in a traditional setting, everything centres on the men, or that's the way that sometimes people think it does. It's very, very strong in John that actually the role of women is quite prominent. You see, you've got Mary and Martha in this story, and I don't think that should be overlooked. You've got Mary outside the tomb. You've got the women who bring the news to the disciples. You've got other stories like the Samaritan woman as well. All right. Here, this is not a great declaration of faith from one of the disciples, one of the men. It's from one of the women. And it shows that certainly in Christian literature, women were honoured much more. They were not overlooked. They were not downplayed. Yes, they had a feminine role. Yes, they had the role of the mother and the wife and the daughter. Absolutely. Okay, and the men were men. That's all very well. But that doesn't mean that women have to be put down. And here, these women are given a place of great honour in this story. They are the centre of the story. It's not all about Lazarus, it's all about these two women. And here she makes this great declaration of faith, which, to be honest, I'm labouring the point a little bit because I think that it's overlooked in many commentaries. We always look to the Confession of Peter as a high point of the synoptics or whatever else. But here's the same statement at the high point of John. We're coming up to the turning point of John, which is the next chapter. And it's one of the women who makes this wonderful declaration: you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is coming into the world. It's just superb. It's just superb. And I don't think that should be just brushed over quickly or overlooked. All right. Now, as we read here, both of the girls say similar things. It shows that actually they've probably been saying similar things to each other. They've been talking to each other. They've discussed it. And so when Mary comes, then she says very similar things to the things that Martha says. All right. But at this point, Jesus really starts to get quite emotional himself. Everyone's crying. The women are crying. The Jews who have come to see the family are crying, and he is deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. Okay, and we have this verse here: Jesus wept, verse 35. It's the shortest verse in the Bible, I think. And the question is, why is he weeping? What is he weeping for? Is he weeping because he lost Lazarus? Well, he knows that he's going to bring him back to the life. Is he weeping because he cares for them? Is he weeping because of something else? Well, the question is, how do we know? Well, you've learned from previous passages that ignorant man, uncomprehending man, does not understand what Jesus says, and so they're there, and whatever they say is the wrong answer. So here, the Jews said, see how he loved him. Right? So that tells you Jesus is not crying because he loved Lazarus. All right? Because the Jews are there to tell you what not to believe. Jesus is crying because of something else. All right? The question is what? The question is what? And lots of ideas have been bandied about. Could be a lack of faith. Could be because he's sympathetic for the women, but it's not because he loved Lazarus. All right? And so you have this sort of clue there. Don't think that. Don't think that. All right? Make sure you think the right thing. The question is, what is that? All right? Now you've got to work that one out. Okay? And of course, also, again, they say, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man also have kept this man from dying? Again, their thinking is very basic. It's all about stopping people from dying. They can't think about somebody coming back to life. All right? So let's take a break there, and then we'll pick up with verse 38 in the next recording.